Ah, the golden age of cinema. When men were men, women were decorative, and racial stereotypes were a cornerstone of comedic relief. There was a time when Hollywood operated like a drunken sailor with a typewriter, churning out movies that, by today's standards, would make even the most hardened old-school film buffs cringe into their artisanal popcorn. There's something wonderfully unrestrained about old films. They reflect an era where filmmakers didn't have to worry about a thing like common sense or basic human decency. Here's a satirical look at 10 vintage films that, for better or worse, could never be made today. First up, Gone with the Wind, 1939, the film that made American slavery look like a slightly inconvenient but generally pleasant misunderstanding. The sweeping epic of the Old South features characters so white they glow in the dark, while African Americans are relegated to the cinematic equivalent of background furniture. Sure, it's a classic, but try pitching a remake today with lines like, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," while portraying plantation life as an extended, leisurely garden party. The cancellation would be faster than Rhett Butler's disappearing act. If there's any film that shows how deeply embedded the ideals of the time were, it's Gone with the Wind. Its romanticized view of the antebellum South and portrayal of slavery as an unbroken tradition, rather than an inhumane institution, is so absurdly disconnected from contemporary sensibilities, it might even give Scarlett O'Hara herself second thoughts. And we're not even touching the depiction of African American characters, whose roles are reduced to stereotypical and subservient positions that would make even the most ardent classic film lover clutch their pearls in horror. Then we have Breakfast at Tiffanys, 1961, a charming, stylish love story starring Audrey Hepburn and an absolutely catastrophic performance by Mickey Rooney as Mr. Yunioshi, a character so offensively stereotyped it could single-handedly cause an international incident today. The exaggerated buck teeth, squinty eyes, and over-the-top accent were apparently meant to be comedic, but modern audiences would sooner use Tiffany's fine china as a projectile than sit through that cringe-worthy spectacle. What should have been a breezy romantic comedy is instead a mishmash of cultural appropriation and borderline xenophobia wrapped in pearls and designer clothing. Imagine trying to pitch that today. We have a leading lady and a quirky, funny character played by a white actor in yellowface. Yeah, good luck with that, Holly Weird. Song of the South, 1946, Disney's forgotten problem child. If you ever wondered why this film is conspicuously absent from Disney+, it might have something to do with its warm, nostalgic depiction of the Reconstruction-era South as a delightful, song-filled utopia where former slaves are just thrilled to stick around and sing cheerful tunes about how great life is. You'd think a film featuring Uncle Remus grinning his way through racial oppression might raise a few eyebrows, but apparently, in the 1940s, this was considered wholesome family fun. And don't even get me started on the portrayal of Biara Rabbit. He was a far cry from the cunning, heroic character we might hope for today. Instead, we get a dim-witted representation of Black folklore and history that utterly fails to grapple with any of the real-life issues. Look, it's a fun little tune about living on a plantation where everyone is smiling through hardship. Yeah, that film would get shut down faster than you could say historical revisionism. Let's not forget Blazing Saddles, 1974, Mel Brooks' masterpiece of equal opportunity offensiveness. While still a beloved comedy, its liberal use of racial slurs and relentless satirization of stereotypes would send today's social media outrage machine into full-scale nuclear meltdown. The film's entire existence hinges on its ability to make fun of everyone equally, but in an era where audiences expect their satire with a side of moral reassurance. This kind of humor would be an unproducible minefield of lawsuits and hurt feelings. Sure, it's all in good fun, but when the punchline is about how the African-American character is more competent than any of the white ones, you can imagine the number of think pieces that would pop up questioning whether the satire was too nuanced for the woke era. And don't even think about trying to remake it. Brooks himself might have to buy the rights just to make sure it stays buried in its hilarious, politically incorrect glory. Another one for the hall of, wait, how did they get away with that? Is The Birth of a Nation, 1915. If D.W. Griffith were alive today, he'd probably have a public relations team working full-time to apologize on his behalf. This film is essentially a 3-hour Ku Klux Klan recruitment video disguised as an epic historical drama. Even in its time, it was controversial. But today, the mere suggestion of remaking it would likely result in angry mobs forming faster than you can say, unreliable narrator. A film that glorifies white supremacy and shows the Klan as a heroic force is, well, about as sensitive as a cactus in a velvet glove. Remaking it today would be akin to asking for a reboot of the Nazis' rise to power, except with fewer redeeming qualities and, presumably, a lot less cultural significance. Then there's Porkys, 1981, the cinematic equivalent of a teenage boy's giggling fever dream. What passes for humor in this comedy classic mostly involves peeping toms, locker room pranks, and a shower scene that probably inspired an entire generation of lawsuits. It's essentially an R-rated Looney Tunes episode, except instead of animated antics, we get problematic, borderline illegal teenage hijinks played for laughs. Modern audiences would call this wildly inappropriate. In the 80s, they just called it a good time at the movies. The world of teen sex comedies may have been fun and raucous at the time, but now it's more likely to get you a visit from a group of HR representatives asking for your resignation. If you ever want to feel the icy chill of discomfort, try sitting through 16 Candles, 1984, without cringing yourself into another dimension. Yes, John Hughes crafted an era-defining teen romance, but he also wrote an entire subplot where a drunk teenage girl is casually handed off like an old couch to another dude who has no idea what consent means. Couple that with the racist caricature of Long Duck Dong, and you've got a movie that aged like a forgotten tuna sandwich in the back of a high school locker. In an era where teenage relationships are expected to be filled with empowerment, mutual respect, and healthy communication, 16 Candles looks more like an awkward reminder that, sometimes, movies can reveal more about a culture's low points than its high ones. Let's talk about The Love Guru, 2008. A film so bafflingly tone-deaf that it may have single-handedly ended Mike Myers' career. It's a movie built entirely around cultural appropriation, where a white guy in brownface dispenses life advice while performing exaggerated Indian accents and mystical nonsense. The film was a box office catastrophe, but in today's climate, even suggesting a remake would be enough to get someone booted from Hollywood faster than you can say cultural sensitivity training. Add to that the forced humor based on embarrassing stereotypes of spiritualism and foreign cultures, and it's no wonder that The Love Guru tanked so spectacularly. If you want a perfect example of how far we've come in terms of representation and self-awareness, this is it. The Love Guru is the kind of film you can look at now and say, this would never happen. Next on our list is Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, 1994, which, at first glance, seems like a harmless goofball comedy starring Jim Carrey at his rubber-faced peak. But then you get to the climax, which hinges on an entire room of people vomiting in horror at the revelation that the villain is transgender. It's the kind of joke that would absolutely not fly today, and rightly so. Audiences now are far less willing to accept, haha, gender identity is scary as a legitimate comedic premise. What was once a pop culture moment has become a glaring example of just how little understanding was given to LGBTQ+ issues in mainstream entertainment at the time. Imagine trying to pitch that today. Let's make the joke about the villain being trans and the punchline being the discomfort of a room full of people. Nope, not in a million years. Finally, Revenge of the Nerds, 1984. A film that gleefully celebrates the underdogs triumphing over their oppressors through identity fraud and, let's be real, what today would 100% be considered sexual assault. The iconic revenge moment involves one of the nerds tricking a cheerleader into sleeping with him while she thinks he's someone else. It's played for laughs in the 80s, but in today's world, this would land our protagonist in prison, not in a feel-good ending montage. The idea of a nerdy underdog using deception and manipulation to win over a woman doesn't exactly scream empowerment in 2025. It's more like a textbook lesson in why the boys will be boys mentality was never okay, no matter how many grand gestures or awkwardly framed romance scenes you throw in. So there you have it, 10 movies that, for better or worse, exist as cultural artifacts of their time, relics from an era when Hollywood's idea of progress was a woman being allowed to have one line of dialogue that wasn't, "Oh, you," or a man learning to tolerate people of other races for exactly one scene before reverting back to type. Some of these films are still considered classics. Others are better left in the vaults of cinematic infamy. But one thing is certain: if you ever want to experience the sheer, unfiltered absurdity of past Hollywood, these movies are a crash course in how much times have changed.